significant. For the King and the Queen's other children, despite all the preparations they will have made for this moment in their emotional selves and in physical ways, there is nothing quite like understanding what this means as they walk to a church for the service, which will lead to a period of about 24 hours when the Queen's coffin will lie in St Giles. It'll be open to people to come and pay their respects. And then, gradually, day by day, back to London, to Westminster Hall, to the lying in state, to the Abbey, Westminster Abbey, for the funeral service, and there out of London to Windsor. So this really is the beginning of that long procession. We started with the transfer of the coffin from Balmoral to Edinburgh by road on Sunday, and now takes on this funereal pace. There was a little bit of shouting somewhere in the crowd, but for the most part it is quiet and contemplative. Flags flying from the buildings in the Royal Mile, as they often do. It is of course a great tourist route, but it's a street, a series of streets steeped in history. I mean, these stones have stories to tell. In a few moments they'll pass on the north side of the Royal Mile, the home of John Knox, that extraordinary 16th century figure whose statue we saw earlier in St Giles, and whose looming figure, standing statue outside the Assembly Hall where the Scottish Parliament first met in 1999. I mean, a deeply controversial figure, but the voice of Calvinism in the mid-16th century and all the upheavals that led to the Reformation. One of his homes was just up the hill there a little on the right, round the next corner. The old town of Edinburgh is a place of great atmosphere. Just passing Canongate Kirk now on the north side there, just hidden in the trees.
God bless the Queen.
Just see the front door of the church as the hearse passes it now.
God bless
The flag flying at half-mast outside.
God bless the Queen.
God bless the Queen, someone calls from the crowd as the King walks past. This part of the city, the old city, which was built really round the castle on the castle rock, which slopes down from the castle esplanade right down to the Palace of Holyrood House, is a place that has held on to its history despite all the upheavals, many of them physical, that have taken away old buildings. There is something left here that remains and reverberates. The clip of these horses' hooves on the cobbles, and the steps of the King and his brothers and sister behind are deeply significant for people here because they mark a passage in history of which this city has seen so many. From one reign to another, from one monarch to another, from a queen to a king. Flags in the crowd, of course, Union flags and Scottish saltires. As we heard earlier from Kirsty, there are many visitors here. Edinburgh is always a city thronged with visitors, and there will be many here from all parts of the world, some from the Commonwealth, who will feel a great closeness to this event, and others who will simply watch in respectful astonishment, perhaps, at the depth and weight that is somehow evident in this solemn procession. When the procession reaches St Giles, it'll be effectively Parliament Square, the old Parliament building of Edinburgh, where the Parliament sat until the Act of Union in 1707, and the Market Cross, which we saw yesterday, where the proclamation was made of the King's accession, with its heraldic symbols, its unicorn on the top, and its traditional place as the heart of the city, really, the heart of Midlothian, which is traced out in cobbles on the pavement just by the Market Cross. The Market Cross, as we call it in Edinburgh, would be a place in which there is a tradition that people spit on it as they go past. It's the title, of course, of one of Walter Scott's great novels, and it was Scott who rediscovered, really, the honours of Scotland, as they're called, really the crown jewels, which lie in Edinburgh Castle, which could be seen by the public. And the crown of Scotland will be placed on the coffin when it reaches St Giles, before the Reverend Callum MacLeod conducts the service of Thanksgiving. Slowly, with great dignity, the hearse comes up the hill, and at each point these crowds who've been waiting here for many hours see for the first time the coffin carrying the late Queen on the journey that will take her from this city back to London to her final resting place in Windsor. After the service here, the King will return to the Scottish Parliament down hard by Palace of Holyrood House, where he will receive the condolences of the Parliament. Parliament, which at its first meeting in 1999, after the referendums which gave birth to it a year earlier, was opened by Her Majesty the Queen on an utterly joyous day in this city. She came up this same route to the old Assembly Hall of the Church of Scotland at the top of the Royal Mile, and there was a very moving opening ceremony for the new Parliament, with people of all parties sharing in the excitement of that day, at which the Queen expressed deep feelings of happiness at a new chapter in history that might lie ahead. In St Giles are the first presiding officers of that Parliament taking their places. Of course, she will meet the current presiding officer when she goes to Parliament, Alison Johnson, MSP. A little later this afternoon, Nicola Sturgeon, obviously the First Minister, and other members of her government are in their places at St Giles, and her predecessors as First Ministers too. Many people have reflected how moving it is at a funeral service, or at least at a Thanksgiving service, as this is. Clearly it's not part of the official funeral, to see a procession on foot, walking slowly, steadily, information, each of them with his or her own thoughts about the history, a family history, a national history that is contained in that coffin. What it represents to them as individuals, as members of a family, and what it represents to the city, the country, one of the four nations of the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom and everything far beyond the Commonwealth and territories, where the Queen was either head of state or was maintaining a deep connection. They're about to pass John Knox's house, which I mentioned earlier, and once that milestone has been reached, St Giles will be in sight and the procession will be nearly home. At each point on the Royal Mile, you can see the crowds as the hearse reaches them.